Hello and welcome to Round the Table, your favourite slow TV radio podcast from the meeting point for students of English not only in Bilbao but throughout the world. And the topic of the week for this week was stupidity. And coming up in this programme we have a lot of phrases from this week's conversations. We have a quote of the week. We have a quick what's the difference question for you. And maybe a few phrasal verbs. And of course, we have celebrity guest speaker coming up later on. So to begin with, let's look at some of the phrases that came up in this week's conversations. Sometime last year, we were discussing Howard Gardner's list of multiple intelligences, and we thought, can we apply the same list to multiple stupidities? For example, in the list of multiple intelligences, it says that having good coordination and sporting ability could be viewed as a type of intelligence. But looking at it from the other side, could we say the opposite is true? Because some people have a total lack of coordination. They are very clumsy people. We often drop things and break things and have accidents and walk into doors and things like that. So maybe we could have a stupidity of a lack of coordination. And certainly a lot of people lack sporting ability. He also mentioned in the multiple intelligences musical ability, calling that an intelligence. And surely lots of people lack musical ability and have absolutely no sense of rhythm. So let's call that one of the multiple stupidities, I think. And we all do things without thinking. Is that considered stupid, do you think? Because often we have accidents caused by a lapse in concentration. We're just not thinking all the time, are we? Sometimes our brains just temporarily turn off and we tend to do rather ridiculous things. And also, when we're under pressure, we don't always think clearly. This is why salespeople, they talk to you on the phone and they try to speak very quickly and confuse you. And then you tend to make decisions, irrational decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make if you had time to think more clearly. So our brains aren't always working in a way they should be working. So we're all prone to moments of stupidity. Now, one other thing that we came up with was that a lot of what we refer to as stupidity is actually ignorance. If you talk about some people who have no idea where countries are, you see these programs on TV where they give them a map of the world and they say, where is Australia? And they point to Canada or something like that. You know, we can say these people are stupid, but really what we're talking is ignorance. So we discussed this a little bit. We discovered that ignorance is about knowledge, whereas maybe stupidity is more about behaviour. Okay? We're not sure about this. This was just the theory that we came up with. But we could talk about willful ignorance. There are people in the world that don't really know much, but they have no interest in learning anything. They have no interest in knowing where these countries are or how these historical events panned out. So is that stupidity, the fact that they're not interested in learning? So willful ignorance is lacking a thirst for knowledge. Lacking a thirst for knowledge. Another thing that we looked at was the word ignore and how the word ignore is related to ignorance, but really they mean slightly different things. Ignorance is not knowing something, but ignoring something, you know it, but you choose not to recognize it or you refuse to think about it. So an example I thought of would be that smoking is bad for you. If you don't know that smoking is bad for you and you continue smoking, then you're just ignorant. You don't know anything, but surely everybody knows these days that smoking is bad. So if you continue smoking, you are ignoring the fact. Yeah, you know that it's bad, but you just choose not to think about it. So that would be the difference between ignore and ignorance. Another useful word would be gullible. Here's a word that we need to know. Gullible is used to describe people that will believe anything they're told. You tell them something and they go, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." And now they think they know something. They are very easily convinced and they believe any piece of information that is put before them. There used to be an old verb, to gull, but it sort of disappeared. But to gull in the past was to trick somebody or to cheat somebody. But now we're left with this adjective gullible. To pull the wool over somebody's eyes is to trick somebody, basically. To cheat them, to trick them. I have another couple of expressions here which are kind of related. The people pulling the strings and the people behind the scenes. We were talking about politicians, and sometimes the president, who, came up in conversation. We were talking stupidity. Why wouldn't we talk about presidents? We were saying that sometimes they are just the face that you see. They are the figurehead, and there are other people who have more power that we don't necessarily see. So if we consider that president as being operated by higher people who have more power, we might consider him to be more like a puppet or a marionette. So there are people pulling the strings. They are operating the president. Okay, that's where that pulling the strings metaphor comes from. And sometimes we say there are people behind the scenes. That really refers to all of the people that are working that you don't necessarily see. So this one comes from theatres, where the people you see are the actors on the stage putting across this presentation, whereas there are lots of people that you don't see in the theatre. The scene shifters, the makeup artists, the costume people, all these people are working in the theatre, but you don't see them. So they are behind the scenes. So both of these phrases we could use when we're talking about the powers that be. There's another interesting phrase. The powers that be. The unseen power in society. And how sometimes the president might just be a figurehead. Now we come on to some expressions to talk about stupid people. There are lots of expressions because people like to talk about other people as being stupid. We don't always recognise the fact that we all have our moments of stupidity. But here are some expressions that we like to use. Not the sharpest tool in the box. Sometimes people say the sharpest tool in the shed or the sharpest knife in the box. This is a way of saying somebody's a bit stupid or they're lacking something. All the other tools are sharper. Another similar one is, he's not the brightest light on the Christmas tree. So you can see that we use things like sharp and bright and quick as well as adjectives to describe quick-witted people, intelligent people. They're sharp, bright, quick. We use those adjectives. Whereas the opposite are dull, dim, slow. We use these words to describe stupid people. We can also use thick and dense. Another phrase is, he's a sandwich short of a picnic. When we use this short of phrase, it means something is missing. Okay, so if you say I'm short of money, it means I don't have enough money. So a sandwich short of a picnic, I don't know, if you're supposed to have 10 sandwiches to make a picnic and he's only got 9 sandwiches, he's a sandwich short. So it means he doesn't have the full set. So it's a metaphorical way of talking about his mental capacity. He's only got 9/10 of a brain and not the full complement of brain cells. Another interesting phrase, the lights are on but nobody's home. He's awake but there's nothing happening inside his head. That's what that means to describe a stupid person. And the simile is as thick as two short planks. A plank is a piece of wood, and I suppose the joke here is that whether the planks are long or short, it shouldn't really make any difference to the thickness. So we say as thick as two short planks. At least that was the traditional saying, and now it seems to be as thick as mince. Mince is finely chopped meat, and I don't know why this has just appeared in the last couple of years. I've started to hear this, but it seems to be the most common one at the moment. He's as thick as mince. Okay, let's have a quick what's the difference? Cause and provoke I had to look into because people tend to use the word provoke a lot when they should only be using cause. So cause is to make something happen, and it's fairly neutral, whereas provoke is to cause a reaction, usually intentionally, so some sort of emotional reaction. So here's some examples with cause. Smoking causes cancer. The storm caused serious damage. His mistake caused a delay. The accident caused traffic problems. Okay, so all it means is that this thing happened and it led to another thing happening. One is the cause of the other. When we use provoke, here's some examples of provoke. So his comments provoked anger. The decision provoked protests. The article provoked a heated debate. A heated debate, that's a good collocation. She was trying to provoke him into losing his temper. So you see, each one of these is probably intentional and to cause a reaction in the other person. Okay, so don't say that the cigarette provoked the fire, okay? Because the cigarette doesn't have any intention in starting fires. So the cigarette caused the fire. Okay, so provoke, it has to be sort of intentional and it's more emotional, let's say. Okay, let's have a couple of phrasal verbs. I've only got 4 phrasal verbs to do with stupidity and making mistakes. So we've got mess up or screw up. Both of these are the same thing. Let's say screw up is a bit more informal. Well, phrasal verbs are usually informal, but some are more informal than others, I suppose. So mess up is when you do a bad job. Basically, that's it. You do a bad job of something. I tried to do this, but I messed it up and I failed. So mess up, screw up are quite similar. Fall for is when you believe something. You can fall for a joke or a prank when somebody's trying to make you believe something ridiculous. If you're gullible, I refer you back to the word I gave you earlier. A gullible person will fall for anything. And a rush into, maybe we could use rush into as a phrasal verb talking about stupidity, because sometimes we rush into things without thinking about things properly. So you can rush into making a decision. So those are some phrasal verbs to do with stupidity. Now I think it's time for Celebrity Guest Speaker.
Stupidity is something that affects everyone, regardless of intelligence. We all have moments when we act without thinking carefully about the consequences. Sometimes we rush into situations, ignore warning signs, or let our emotions guide our actions. Being intelligent does not make anyone immune to making mistakes. Many people assume that smart individuals make better decisions, but this is not always true. Intelligence and good judgment are not the same thing. Highly educated and successful people can still make foolish choices, especially when they are overconfident or fail to consider all the available information. People often form opinions without enough evidence and then become attached to them. Once we accept an idea as true, changing our minds can be difficult. New evidence is often ignored if it conflicts with our existing beliefs. Rather than reconsidering their position, many people prefer to defend what they already think. These weaknesses can have important consequences in politics. Politicians often succeed by offering simple answers to complex problems. Catchy slogans and confident promises are usually more attractive than detailed explanations. As a result, voters may support ideas that sound good without examining them too closely. Leaders and politicians are also vulnerable to the same errors in judgment as everyone else. They can be influenced by pressure, personal interests, emotions, or poor advice. History provides many examples of people in positions of authority making serious mistakes despite having access to expert knowledge and information. Education can help people think critically, evaluate evidence, and question unsupported claims. In the past, many believed that educating ordinary people was unnecessary or even undesirable. But an informed population is better able to make sensible decisions and resist manipulation. Ultimately, the human race may not be as clever as we like to imagine. Our greatest weakness may be our confidence in our own abilities. When people assume they are always right, they stop questioning themselves. Recognizing our limitations may be one of the smartest things we can do.
Here's an interesting map. I know you'd like to see some research in progress. This is the average IQ by country in 2026. Now the IQ, some people criticize IQ tests and say that they're really testing your ability to do tests. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. The darker colors have the highest IQ. So you see China over here, 106.48. So the average person should be 100. If you're 100, you're perfectly normal. Okay, so 106 is above average. So all of the darker colors are the high ones. And if we look at the top of the page here, the highest one here is Hong Kong with 107.73. The lowest is Somalia, 83.84. And there are lots of grey ones that don't appear to have any statistics. At the bottom here, we've got the top scoring countries, and look at them. Look where they're all located. Hong Kong, South Korea, China, Macau, Japan, Taiwan, all in the same area with very high IQs. Let's have a look at the European ones. Let's zoom in a little bit, shall we? Here we go. United Kingdom, 101.57. Come down here to Spain is quite dark. Look, 102.23. You beat Britain and you're above France as well. And Portugal is a bit low. Oh, Portugal is below average. So all of the European ones, Germany's a little bit low, surprisingly. Poland, they're all around about 99, look, and a few hundreds, 101. So they're all around the 99s, most of the European countries, and, well, Britain and Spain are actually a little bit higher than the rest of Europe, which is rather good. The African countries, of course, are quite low. Some very low scores there. Of course, the lowest one here is Somalia. And if you remember the chart from last week, they don't eat a lot of fish. So maybe that's the reason. They need to eat more fish. Canada, quite high. America, above average. And then they go down in South American countries are slightly below. These African ones, very low. But yep, it's over here in the east where the highest IQ levels are. I've got another chart coming up here. This is literacy rate by countries. So all the dark ones have very high literacy. For some reason, there's a lot of grey countries like Canada and France where they have no statistics. Or maybe they're keeping quiet about it. Maybe there's something to be ashamed of. So we've got very low literacy through Central Africa here. South Sudan is the lowest. Only a quarter of the people in South Sudan can read and write. The other ones with high literacy, 100%, Uzbekistan, North Korea, they say, though who knows, they're probably lying, don't believe them. Norway and Finland, Luxembourg and Andorra, again, these small countries. Probably got a lot of money, good education system. So there you go. Most of these European countries around about 99. Spain a bit higher than the average Europeans. Well, they're up with Poland, but Germany's 99, UK's 99, Spain 99.7, Portugal down to 94. That is a little bit low, isn't it? But even that, you think of this, look, 99%, that means that one person in every 100 cannot read and write. That seems rather a lot, really, in the modern world. Same as in the US, look. Some of the Central American countries a little lower. But definitely Central Africa is the place not to be. What's this? Afghanistan. Well, that's a low one. Oh, but that's probably because they don't let girls have education. So if maybe that's true for a lot of these countries. Maybe that could account for the very low literacy if girls are not allowed to go to school. Anyway, I thought that might be an interesting chart for you to look at. Literacy and IQs around the world. It's easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they have been fooled. I don't know who is responsible for the quotation, but it's very good and very true. We often find that people believe something, and once people have a belief, it's very difficult to persuade them that they're actually wrong and to give them fresh information. Even on a very simple level, we were discussing this week that if, for example, somebody told you that the President of the US was born in Miami, and then about a week later somebody told you that the President of the US was born in California, you would say, no, he was born in Miami. you would have much more preference for the first piece of information. That would carry the weight. You would need a lot of persuasion to change that opinion and put in the new piece of information about him being born in California. And it happens with a lot of things. And especially when things like cultural stereotypes that we've been looking at a lot recently. People find it very hard to accept that Scandinavian people, though they have a good education system, they are all manically depressed alcoholics. I've given you the statistics to prove otherwise. People will also be very surprised to learn last week that in the United States they eat 22 kilos of fish every year because everyone's convinced they only eat hamburgers. But sometimes the information comes and you have to replace the old information with the new. But it's a very hard thing to do. It's not in our human nature to accept that we're wrong. And this is why we have things called confirmation biases. We look for the information to tell us that we're right. The information that tells us we're wrong, we very conveniently ignore. Anyway, that's a very interesting quote of the week. And here's just one last-minute piece of news before we finish. Thank you to everybody that attended the Friday special session to discuss the play An Inspector Calls. A fascinating play, and sorry to all those people that couldn't attend. There was a bit of a timetable problem for a lot of people, a clash of commitments, which meant that certain people were not able to attend. But those that were there, we had a fascinating conversation. It's a great play, and maybe we'll discuss it again next year. If anyone else has any suggestions for plays, I'm looking for another one to do. I'll be looking around during the summer to see what else I can find. But if there's any suggestions, as I say, let me know. Coming up on the 26th, we've got Friday the 26th. That's our final Friday. Well, that'll be the end of the week for most of the groups. The Friday group will continue for another week after that. We'll have a wine and cheese session, or at least a beer and cheese session. We might just look at the bottle of wine. And I think we were discussing crisp flavours recently, so if anyone wants to bring their favourite flavour crisps along, maybe that would enhance the party atmosphere. So we'll be doing that on the 26th, so put your name on the board if you want to attend. This is episode 99 of the podcast, so next week our topic will be perfect. And for the topic of perfect, we have the perfect episode 100. So don't forget to share it with all your friends and tell everybody to subscribe. The more people that subscribe, the more popular the Meeting Point project becomes. So I hope you all tune in next week for another wonderful podcast. And if I don't see you in class, have a good week. Till next week.